of Canterbury, and I commend the bill to the House.
Andrew Williams.
Thank you, Mr Speaker. I take a call on behalf of New Zealand First with the Environment Canterbury Temporary Commissioner's Bill. And hasn't this been an interesting week of undermining of democracy in New Zealand? And many people around New Zealand watching this broadcast and watching it over this last week will be somewhat flabbergasted and in awe of this Parliament that the undermining of democracy could continue in this country in the manner that it has. Particularly so when the submissions on this particular bill came from so many different sectors who said it was time to return democracy to Canterbury, including even the commissioners themselves. Dame Margaret Baisley, a very eminent public servant who has headed up the commissioners there, and her other commissioners, recommended that there be a transition back to a shared arrangement with the commissioners and with elected representatives, with the intention to then get fully back to elected representatives in due course. That recommendation from Dame Margaret Baisley has been ignored by this government. That would have been a sensible solution by this government to allow a transition back so that perhaps the knowledge and the expertise that the commissioners have had over the last year or two could have been transitioned back to the newly elected people, so that there would be comfort from all sides that it was a proper process and that due course was being allowed to run in terms of the democratic principles in Christchurch. It was also interesting that the regulatory impact statement also from the Department of Internal Affairs and from the Ministry of the Environment also recommended that democracy be returned to Canterbury. Those recommendations again were ignored from those departments. Christchurch City Council itself, in its report, also called for the return of elections for Environment Canterbury. And again, the local authority, the second largest local authority in New Zealand, which has been going through a huge amount of pain in the last couple of years, has also been ignored in this. And it was very interesting that one of the most compelling submissions that came to our committee, to the Local Government Environment Committee, came from David Rutherford, the Chief Human Rights Commissioner, and he stated, and I quote, "The Commission considers that no good reason has been provided for extending the present legislation. The lack of public consultation about content or the continuing need for the legislation is an abuse of the democratic process and does not reflect the real needs of Cantabrians. In our view, that is the Commission's view, the present legislation has the potential to further exacerbate the resentment that has arisen in Canterbury as a result." He also said, "Our view continues to be that the undemocratic way in which the original legislation was introduced and its continuance is simply wrong from a human rights perspective." And isn't that interesting, Mr Speaker, that when questioned at the Local Government Environment Committee, the Chief Human Rights Commissioner said that New Zealand had gone to war to stop regimes denying people their democratic rights, to deny the proper process of a democratic place for people to live in. And in this respect, he said we were somewhat hypocritical in this country to be pointing the finger at other regimes around the world, and the names of Fiji and Zimbabwe were mentioned, while at the same time denying those same principles here in our country, New Zealand. And that was quite an eye-opener. So much so that the members from the National Party who sat there took some offence and got a little bit heated and got a bit hot under the collar when the Chief Human Rights Commissioner mentioned that. And in fact, we were almost wanting him to retract his words, but he wouldn't, and he stood by his words. And he said New Zealand will have great difficulty in international forums in the future trying to point the finger at others about having the right of the vote for every person in their particular countries, when here in New Zealand those same principles are not upheld in Canterbury. And in that respect, Mr Speaker, New Zealand First has huge doubts about the integrity of this current government, because We've seen what they've done in areas like Auckland. We've seen what they've done in other parts of New Zealand. They don't listen to submitters, and we've seen it this week in this Parliament. I'm absolutely appalled. So many bills this week in this Parliament, the government has just wanted to close them down, shut them up and move them on, and not allow proper debate in the House of Representatives. This is the House of Representatives. They seem to forget that there are 121 members of Parliament who represent all of the people of New Zealand. They seem to forget that. And they seem to forget that the purpose of this chamber, Mr Speaker, is to fully debate and flesh out all the arguments, the pros and the cons, of whatever is being put forward in legislation to ensure that it does receive full and fair and frank and robust debate. And yet time and time again this week, on so many bills of social importance, of economic importance, of importance to the lives of people in New Zealand, the people sitting on the other side of this House, sitting there in the Treasury benches, have just wanted to stop the debate, shut the debate down, and not even put up a robust rebuttal or defence of their position. And that is appalling, that they're not prepared to put to the people of this country any decent argument on so many issues this week, on so many bills this week, not prepared to defend their position at all. And that is arrogance. That is total arrogance. The people of New Zealand are seeing the total arrogance, and it is appalling. And, Mr Speaker, they will remember we're now 18 months out from an election, 18 months from an election, and that clock is ticking, and it's ticking very, very quickly. And the wheels are falling off, and the true face of the National Party is coming through. The arrogance is coming through, and this is the latest, and this is one of the worst examples of that. Denying the people in Canterbury, who've gone through so much in the last couple of years, that basic human fundamental right to vote. And isn't it incredible that we were celebrating the vote of women, which all started from the uprising in Canterbury, and how the women's vote was so important that how many years ago was it? 1896 or whatever, that the women of Canterbury then fought to get the right to vote. They would be rolling in their graves, some of those women today, rolling in their graves if they thought they went through all that to get the right to vote for women, only to find that 120 odd years later, not only the women don't get the right to vote, but also the men of Canterbury don't get a right to vote either. It is unbelievable. What a backward step under this national government that is. Well, I can assure you, New Zealand First can assure you, that under a different government, which New Zealand First hopefully will be part of, there will be a return to democracy in Canterbury. And we will return the right of every Cantabrian to ask for and have their elected people speak for them in Canterbury, not people brought in by the National Party on all sorts of high fees, former Prime Ministers on $1,000 a day, and the likes of the ring-ins from the National Party. That will stop, and the local people of Canterbury once again will have their men and women representing them and standing up for the best interests of Canterbury.
Maggie Barry.
Thank you, Mr Speaker. As the Honourable Michael Woodhouse said at the beginning of this debate, we acknowledge the concerns of the submitters. We acknowledge very much